All right, so good morning. I'm Natalie Ferlette from Campus Compact. I'll tell you a little bit more about Campus Compact in a minute. Thank you for joining us, and thank you to Heartland for having us. This is just an opportunity to talk a little bit about the census, which we were all super excited about, and then all of this craziness happened, and so we want to make sure that people remember that it's still time to fill out their census and that it's an important thing to do. Because it only happens every 10 years and it really gives us a lot of information and support. So I'm just going to get started. All right, so as I said, we're going to start with some welcomes and introductions. I'm going to talk a little bit about sort of a Census 101, really basic. So if there are things that you have questions about that I do not hit, I am a very, very casual presenter, so feel free to throw things into the chat box, unmute yourself, ask me questions, whatever is fine with me. And then we'll have some more time for questions and answers at the end. All right, so I just welcomed everyone. So Campus Compact, we are a membership organization for colleges and universities, and we work on all things civic engagement. So we believe that colleges are here to create better citizens, which means that we help with things like voter education and voter registration. We do work on service learning, community-based research, community engaged learning, anything that really helps students and faculty and staff get engaged in the communities around their campuses and beyond. And we really hope that we can be a resource for anyone who's interested in what it looks like for a campus to be engaged. I've included our Twitter on there. Our website is at the end, so feel free to ask me any other questions about civic engagement that may not be involved in census work as well. Eva is on here from PERG, and I'm going to give her a second to introduce them as well.
I had to unmute there.
Yeah.
Will you hear me?
Yes.
So I am Eva. I'm from Illinois PERG. I'm an organizer and a campaign organizer for them. Illinois PERG is a nonprofit, nonpartisan, citizen-funded and student-based organization here in Illinois. For 30 years, we've worked on protecting the environment, public health. We fight for consumers and to make college more affordable. And one of our biggest sort of causes that we've been working for in Illinois for a while now is strengthening our democracy. So Illinois PERG was one of the key advocates in passing the automatic voter registration bill. So we're excited to be here. And excited to have students participate in the census. I'm going to go ahead and hand it off to Peter Arsenal. Peter is the Veteran Constituent Services Representative for U.S. Representative Rodney Davis, and he is also their census lead. So Peter, I'm handing it off to you.
All right, good morning, everyone. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay, great. So like I said, my name is Peter Arsenal. I'm a Bloomington Normal native. I work for Congressman Rodney Davis, handling military veteran issues, tax law issues, and importantly for today, the census. So Congressman Davis has been actively engaged in the U.S. Census Bureau throughout the 2020 census. The electoral representation from the local level up to the federal level for the local and state level census data is used to redraw ward maps, county board districts, and legislative districts. At the federal level, it's not only used in redistricting, but also apportionment of how many members Congress in Illinois will have. We have 18. Projections are showing that we're going to be going down to 17 after the census. And if we don't make sure that every single person in Illinois is counted, we're potentially going down to 16. So for every single person that's not counted in the state of Illinois, we're losing representation. Also important is funding. State and local government funding in many areas is based off a per capita basis. So it's crucial that absolutely everyone gets counted. As far as what we've done so far, last year we worked with the Census Bureau to promote open field staff positions in the 14 counties that make up Illinois' 13th congressional district. Right now, we're using social media and other online tools to urge constituents everyone else to complete their census. As of Sunday, April 5th, 49.4% of Illinois' 13th district's households had completed the census, with 43.8% completing it online. I'm here to answer any questions you may have. If I don't have the answer right off the top of my head, I can certainly look it up. I'm happy giving out my phone number. I'm working from home all day, so I'm here to answer any questions anyone has.
Thank you so much for joining us.
Absolutely.
All right. So, as Peter just mentioned, there's a lot at stake with the census. So what is the census? The US Constitution mandates that the census of the population be conducted every 10 years. So that basically means that in our Constitution, it says that we have to count every single person who's living in the United States, citizen, non-citizen, every person who's here every 10 years. Through that data, the census data is used to determine how more than $675 billion in federal funds are distributed to states. And so you can imagine that if we don't get the right, a good count, and we don't count everyone who's here, then that can equate to a lot of money that we lose in federal funds. So what's at stake for Illinois? Why should this be important? So this, as Peter pointed out, Illinois is currently poised to lose possibly one seat, if not two, in the House of Representatives. So basically, it's not just because we may have lost population, which folks are predicting we have, but also because there's a finite number of seats, and those seats are proportioned based on other states' populations as well. So if Texas has had a large boom in population and Illinois has not, then we would still lose a seat even if our census data comes back that we are, have similar numbers as we did 10 years ago. That also affects how Illinois votes for the president, because it affects our electoral college votes. But more than that, and how it affects your daily life, is the billions in federal funds that come into the state based on census data. So that's for highway and transportation, that's for Head Start programs for young children, that's for free school lunch programs in K through 12, Medicaid funding through the state. It also, for students, affects you through direct loans and Pell Grants and how those are distributed to states. So really important that we get good counts, particularly when we're thinking about higher ed and how that affects our ability to fund our students and support our students. So what's at risk? Illinois is at risk of losing $20 billion of federal funding over many years, depending on our undercounts. So there are areas in Illinois that have an undercount of 20 to 30%, which means that we know that there's people who live there, and undercounts are calculated in different ways, but we know that there are a certain number of students enrolled in school, in K through 12 schools, but if those students aren't counted in the census, then those schools might not be getting the amount of funding they should be getting. And so those are some of the ways that the undercount is determined is, we know that a certain number of people are getting driver's license in a certain area, but that might not reflect in the same way in the census. And so, we can statistically say that 70% of the people that live there were counted based on other numbers. And so the census data is really important because it's how the federal government determines how they're distributing the funds, but it doesn't always, because if people don't participate, it doesn't always reflect exactly what's happening in that community. An undercount in Illinois would be about 120,000 people, and that could cost the state an undercount of 1%. So just 1%, right? So I was just talking about some areas are, at 70% of their count. Just 1% could be 120,000 people that don't get counted, and that can cost the state $1.2 billion over the next decade. That's a lot of money and a lot of services that the state wouldn't be able to provide for us. So what else is at stake? So as we talked about, your representation, right? So when you go out and vote for your representative, currently, as Peter mentioned, there are 14 counties in the 13th district. Well, if we have to reapportion all of that, there could be more counties, and that's a lot of area for one representative to cover. And it also makes it harder, not necessarily harder, but it could make it more difficult for us to interact with some of our elected representatives. So one thing that came up a lot in a lot of these conversations I've had is the citizenship question. So there was a lot of noise about this in the fall about whether or not there would be a citizenship question. There is not a citizenship question on the census. So for anyone who might have still had some lingering doubts about that, that is not happening. So you don't have to worry about that. So how does the census work? What is on the census? So I know this is really small, but I'll talk a little bit about what it is and how this works. This is what the paper form looks like. This isn't what it looks like if you go online. And I'll talk a little bit about the different ways that you can fill it out, but I just wanted to kind of give you a general idea of what you're asked, right? So you're going to be asked about how many people live in your residence. Now, one thing to remember is that when the census comes to your house, it is not addressed to a person. Census data is based on who lives in residences. So it will come to a house and it will say to the person living in 1 Main Street, Bloomington, Illinois. And that person who, whoever the head of household is, and that can be lots of different people, will then fill it out for everyone who lives in that residence. So for example, if you live with roommates and, if you live with roommates, then one person in your apartment should fill it out, even though you might not be related. So the idea is that it's based on per household, not on who owns the house, not on what, the family that you're part of. It's based on the actual residence. So you'll ask for the number of people who live there. And for every person, they'll ask you to provide that person's name. They will ask you to provide male or female. And I think we all recognize that that is not inclusive of all of our LGBTQ community members. It is a default in the census, right, that we don't ask beyond that, but it is where we are. And so you do have the option of not necessarily filling that out, but that's the question that folks have on there. It asks for the person's age and birth date, and then it asks you to identify the person's race. And then if you do this online, if you mark white, you still have to put in something else, as in sort of how you identify. So that could be country of origin, that could be your ethnic background. It's the same for pretty much any of the other ones that if you see on the bottom or on question number 9, where there's like a spot to write something in. So for example, I didn't really know what to write because I have a mishmash of background. So I put white and I put Jewish, because that's sort of my ethnic background that I identify with. I know that there are some folks in the Illinois Muslim community who are encouraging folks to write white and their country of origin, because there is no Arab American option. Again, there are a lot of things about the census that maybe don't necessarily reflect how folks identify themselves. And so you have to sort of figure out the way to do that as best you can. And again, if you're filling this out for roommates and your roommate isn't sitting right there and you don't know how they identify, you don't have to fill that part out. What they're trying to do is get a snapshot of what this looks like. So you'll see too in question number 4, they ask you for a telephone number. That telephone number is in case they have any follow-up questions. So, if you fill this out and you don't have your roommates' birthdays or ethnicities, they may call you and ask you about that. But what I'm hearing from the Census Bureau is that most likely, if you fill this out at all, you won't necessarily get a whole lot of follow-up, just because they just don't have the time or the staff to do that. But again, I can't make that promise. So to do this online is the my2020census.gov. The other big question I get from folks is, what if I don't have the letter, right? What if the letter never showed up, or I don't have it? And so I don't have the little code that you can fill into the website to fill it out. That is totally okay. What you can do is go to my2020census.gov, there's a little button that says get started. You click the get started button, and then it asks you for your code, and then under that it says, I don't have my code, find me by my address, or something to that effect. And then you go in and you put in your address and you can fill it out. The other question I get asked a lot is, well, what if my roommate did it and I did it, and now we've double counted? That's okay. What I've been hearing from the Census Bureau is that they have mechanisms within their system that can help to weed out some overcounts, right? So they know if somebody's filled it out twice and they compare that information and then they, put it into the system the right way. They would rather more people fill it out than not fill it out, right? So they'd rather have you over counted so that they can fix it than not have anyone in that house counted at all. So always err on the side of, I should just fill it out, because the Census Bureau can fix things if we have to. All right, so the timetable. So now we're kind of in spring-ish. Starting in on March 12th, people should have started getting the letters in the mail saying, hey, it's time to fill out your census. Once they got the first letter that had their code that they should go online and fill out, then they started getting some postcards to remind them. I actually got my letter and a postcard reminding me on the same day. I don't know when they send these things out, but you'll keep getting postcards to remind you until they start sending out census takers. So that timeline has been pushed a little bit, like so many other things, because of COVID-19. So technically, we're all supposed to fill out the census by April 1st. If you hadn't filled out the census, particularly in college areas, they have something called early non-response follow-up. That non-response follow-up was supposed to start at the end of this week, actually, April 9th, with folks coming to knock on doors to do the census data. Unfortunately, because of COVID-19, nobody's coming out to knock on doors. And so all of that has been pushed back. So they most likely will not start to do the non-response follow-up until May. So what that means is that there won't be census takers knocking on your door yet, just because of everything happening. We all know, like, I don't want someone knocking on my door right now. And the easiest way to avoid a census taker knocking on your door is to go online and fill it out, or to call and request a paper copy, or to call and do the census online. And I'll go over those in a minute as well. So as I said, they'll do the non-response follow-up. That still will happen. At some point, census takers are going to go out and knock on doors. But the hope is right now that we are getting as much of the information as possible. So as Peter said, right now, almost 50% of that congressional district has filled out their census form, which is amazing, but we want to get that up, right? Like, ideally, we'd want it to be 100%. That's not going to happen, but if we can get to 80s, 90s%, like, then we'll be in a much better spot. All right. So here's about how you actually fill out the census. So there's multiple ways to fill out the census. You can go online, as I mentioned. The website was on there, and I can tell you guys that again. There are multiple languages that the census is available in. So if English is not your first language, or if you're helping your grandmother and she speaks another language, the census is available in 12 languages online and 59 or 60 languages on the phone. So if you call the 800 number there, they can connect you with someone who speaks your language to make it much easier to fill out the census. So again, don't feel like you have to fill it out in English, or that, if you're helping a family member or a friend who English is their second language, that's okay. We have other options. And particularly because we want the data to be as accurate as possible, if it's easier for someone to fill it out in another language, then do that, because that makes a lot more sense. So you can call and complete it over the phone. So you can just give someone the information over the phone if you'd rather do that, or you can request that they send you a paper copy, and they will do that too. What I included on here too is that the Illinois Department of Human Services has a text message help center. So if you text question to 987-987, someone will be able to answer any questions you have about the census. And so again, it's just a really nice easy way to get some answers if you're confused about a question online, if you didn't get the form. Like, there's lots of things that they can help you with at this 987-987. So I think it's a great opportunity for folks if they need some extra help. All right, so what can you do to help get out the count, right? So, you know, this whole thing is about how do we get a fair and accurate count in Illinois, so that we're, you know, counted to the best of our ability. So again, sharing what's important, right? So share why you know that the census is important, share why this is something that we should all be doing. Talk to your friends and family. Like, we're all spending so much time online right now. It would be really easy to put a census message in your social media, or share with your family that you're filling out the census and you think it's important for them to do it as well. Help folks figure out the plan, right? So if somebody's not comfortable filling it out online, which is totally fair, you know, give them the other options. Tell them about their phone options and their mail options and all of that fun stuff. Maybe you can help a nonprofit to organize. So there's a lot of folks who are doing this work, and I'll give you a website at the end as well that talks a little bit more about this. But lots of nonprofits trying to get out this information. They have people making phone calls or going out on social media. You know, a lot of this stuff had originally been in person, right? So we were going to have tables in the middle of quads on campuses and all that stuff, and we can't do that anymore. So how can we get this message out in a way that still helps people understand why it's important? And then lastly, you know, help people, right? Support them if they have questions. Send them to that 987-987 text opportunity. Help them find opportunities online to answer their questions, and I can show you a few of those as well. Just be around to answer questions, because it's important that we all get counted, and it's important that we make sure that all of the folks in our communities get counted. Something that I didn't talk about yet that's really important to remember is that there are some communities that have been traditionally undercounted for a variety of reasons. But for example, 0 to 5-year-olds are traditionally undercounted, which means that people just don't remember to include their kids because they think it's, oh, we're just accounting for adults. But no, you really have to include children, because that's how we decide how education money is spent and where it goes, right? So if a community has an undercount of, you know, even 50 kids, then the money going to the schools will not be there for those kids when they get to K through 12, right? So if you have a newborn baby sitting next to you while you're filling out your census and you don't remember to include the child, right, then for 10 years, that child is not counted in the population. And that's, you know, how many years of their early schooling. Other hard to count populations include non-English speakers, again, because maybe it's just not, they're not getting the information in a language that makes sense to them. Some of it could be people in colleges are usually considered hard to count because so many of you are renters, and so you don't necessarily think to do it, or you think one of your roommates have done it, or you think that your parents are counting you where you used to live, but you actually live where you are. So again, just important that we make sure that hard to count folks are being counted. Other great populations that are good to talk to about this is if you're part of a religious organization, right? So if your church is still meeting online and you want to ask your pastor to, you know, give a census message, that's really helpful because people listen to their religious leaders. If you want to ask your professor in your next class to just remind people to fill out their census, a really great way to do that as well. So anyways, I think it's really important that we all pay attention to this, and that's sort of why we're doing this. We've had a program on campuses across the state where we have census fellows, including one at Heartland, trying to get this information out to people, particularly because this does affect you as higher ed students. It does affect the funding that might go to your school based on how many folks live there. And it affects your ability to get grants and loans for college. So again, just important to remember. So lastly, sorry. So I've included two websites here. So the Illinois Count Me in 2020 is a group of nonprofits and funders across Illinois who are working together to get this message out to folks. So that includes lots of different folks from different cultural groups, ethnic groups. So for example, if you are looking for information in Mandarin, you will be able to find that type of information on the Illinois Count Me in 2020. I also included our website, illinoiscampuscompact.org, because we are doing a lot of work on specifically supporting campuses. So there's a really fantastic video that the Census Bureau did specifically for college students that we have on our main census page. There's a great video that was done by Forefront, which is this Illinois Count Me in 2020 coalition, again, about the importance of the census and why people should fill it out. So for any faculty who might be on here, if you're looking for something quick to give some information, the Census Bureau video is only 2 minutes and 30 seconds long. It speaks directly to college students, and it's a really helpful resource. We also have lots of other links to other information directly from the Census Bureau, from some of our other partners, just to keep people updated. So that was it. Sort of wanted to give you a Census 101, answer any questions folks might have. We do have a comment from Jean Marie Taylor that she's actually working with the Census Bureau. Fantastic. And they're holding trainings right now. Again, if there's questions about that piece of it, sort of who's doing the door knocking, that sort of thing, I'm sure we can probably get some answers on that as well. So I'm just going to end there and open it up for any questions. So folks can unmute themselves or they can put questions in the chat box. I'll stop sharing this right now. All right, I'm not seeing any questions in the chat or anybody unmuting. All right. Well, I don't want to keep folks longer than we need to.
Natalie, looks like there's a question in the chat about.
Oh, I do see that, yes. Is there a way to count? Yes, okay. So the question is about counting the homeless population. So this is actually part of what is called group quarters, which is also how folks who live in like residence halls in universities get counted. There's a whole section of the Census Bureau called group quarters that counts folks who live in group homes, right? So like nursing homes, community dorm rooms, prisons, and included in that is the homeless population. Usually what they do is they designate 2 nights, I believe, that they literally have folks go out and count the homeless population in communities, right? Unfortunately, because of COVID-19, they're having to reorganize that a little bit. So they're working with homeless shelters, other providers to homeless folks to really try and get any information they can about who these people are and where they are. So that is another one that's a little bit more difficult, but they do an actual, like, because they were supposed to do the actual count March 31st and April 1st, where they sent census takers out to talk to homeless folks where they were, but that has been delayed, and I'm not sure if they've rescheduled it, but they are working with providers who work with homeless individuals to try and get that number as well.
And I can touch on that as well.
Oh, thank you.
One of the main efforts to help count the homeless population is enumerators are sent out to soup kitchens, food pantries, and other places that homeless populations usually congregate. And they'll set up for a few days. And so everyone who comes in, they're counted then. And then they are kind of cross-referenced against other soup kitchens to make sure no one's counted twice, but it's still that effort to go out into the community and make sure that absolutely everyone's counted.
Thank you so much. Any other questions? Just looking back over the chat to make sure I didn't miss anything. All right. Well, so I want to thank everyone for being here. I will provide the recording of this and the slides to Skylar. So if anyone would like this, you can have it. I'll also put it up on our website. And again, if there's any questions, I didn't include my email on the slides, but I'll put it in the chat so that if folks want to follow up with me, they can do that. So thank you all very much.
Thank you, Natalie.
Yeah, thank you, Natalie.
Yeah, thanks.
Alrighty, if anyone else needed to grab any sort of extra credit for this, feel free to raise your hand from the participant window and I will record you if necessary. But if you've already chatted with your